If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
What are some of the scariest legends, local myths, or scary tales from your town that still creep you out?
There's a creepy urban legend that goes something like this. A man on a business trip checks into a hotel and is assigned a room but is told to avoid the room next door because a woman's spirit reportedly haunts that room. Later in the evening, he gets curious and decides to check the room out. Finding the door locked, he attempts to peek through the keyhole to gain a glimpse of the room's interior. Instead of a room, all he can see is solid red on the other side. Disappointed, he leaves and goes back to his room for the evening. Upon checkout the next morning, he asks the receptionist for more information. She tells him that a woman was murdered in there and that witnesses report her ghost to be dressed in all white with solid red eyes. Crawford Plantation in Appomattox, Virginia. Elijah Crawford, a former Civil War soldier and farmer, lost his wife and eventually his daughter and became infatuated with the idea of bringing them back to life. One of his slaves was a witch doctor, and he had her perform rituals to bring back his wife and daughter. He sacrificed every animal he had and eventually turned to killing slaves and anyone on the plantation to perform these rituals. No one knows where his wife and daughter are buried because they've been dug up so much. Land still exists, and they do ghost tours there annually every fall. It ranks among the top 10 haunted places in the U.S. and is the most haunted place in Virginia. Additionally, the property still features the original Stagecoach Road, and legend has it that you can still hear the sound of wagons and horses. I've been to this location, and the place is absolutely screwed up. The Young Lady of the Highway. I remember this story from my grade school years, and people swore to it long after that. Near Greentown, Pennsylvania, there was a story of a young woman in a long green, no coincidence, cape who would flag down highway travelers for a ride, always on a stormy/wintry night. She supposedly would ask them to drive to her parents' house, a remote and modest home near Newfoundland in northeast Pennsylvania. And, when the travelers would arrive there, she would somehow slip out of their car, leaving a wet puddle from ice/rain in the backseat. But once the travelers got inside and met/greeted the elderly parents over a cup of tea, they learned that the young woman had died at least a decade ago in a car crash or some other tragedy on the highway. To refute the travelers' shock and disbelief, the elderly parents would open a cabinet and show as proof a dry and dusty old green cape that their late daughter had worn the night of her death. Grew up in a small rural village, and there was a story that dated from around the 1600s or 1700s called the Witch of Winterslow. The legend goes that farmers hunting animals like hares or foxes would find that as their dogs were about to make a kill, a large white hare would suddenly appear out of nowhere and lead the dogs astray, with neither the hunting dogs, their prey, nor the white hare ever being seen again. This happened so many times that the village began to run out of hunting dogs, and the local village vicar suspected that witchcraft was at play, so he fashioned a custom-made bullet forged out of a silver coin and joined a hunt, and when the white hare appeared, he shot it. The white hare was hit by the silver bullet but was not killed outright, instead being mortally injured and jumping into a thicket and disappearing before the hunting party could catch up to it. When the hunting party returned back to the village, they found it in a state of drama because a local lady called Lydia Shears had been found shot in her cottage and was bleeding out badly. The woman died as a barber surgeon attempted to extract the bullet from her, but as he did, it turned out to not only be the exact same bullet that the vicar had shot the magic hare with, but the lady had been shot in the exact same part of her body as the hare. After that day, the white hare disappeared, so people believed Lady Lydia was the Witch of Winterslow and that the hare was one of her transformations. An old family legend turns out to be true. On my mother's side, there was a story that had been told since I was a kid and before me to my older siblings, cousins, and even my younger aunts and uncles. It is somewhat of a ghost story, but as some family stories go, the times and details get muddy. When the story was first told to me, it took place in the early 1920s, and here is how it goes. A family member, it varied from great-grandmother to great-grand-aunt, was a little kid, and her family was traveling and decided to pull over and picnic and camp for the night. I always assumed they were part of the Dust Bowl movement because the story was they were heading to California. The story goes that during the night, the little girl, my great-grandmother or great-grand-aunt, hears screams and yelling. She runs and hides and looks out from behind a tree as she witnesses her entire family being hacked to death with an axe. The lore was if you went to the site and camped there, you could hear their screams, and no one ever caught the Axeman killer. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, through Ancestry.com and researching my family history. I confirmed with a great-uncle the truth of our family story. My great-great-grandmother was a survivor of the Apache massacre in New Mexico. I ended up visiting the site, and there is a wiki page about the 1861 massacre where they attacked settlers that were on their way to California. My family's wagon train was crossing the area, and my great-great-grandmother's family was all killed. She was the only survivor from the family and ended up being adopted by a local family. Our family name was lost as she was so small. Also, the story was that her mother hit her so she wouldn't be killed. She was later found by a garrison militia in the area and turned over to the Catholic Church nearby. In my city, there is a lake where the corpse of a bride killed by her fiancé was once thrown. They say that she appears dressed in a white gown during the night at the local road, just at the side of the lake, and causes drivers to crash and drown in the waters. The same lake is, by itself, full of myths and legends. They also say that sometimes a bell, like the bell of a church or cathedral, can be heard ringing around the lake, that the tops of towers/castles can sometimes be seen at night partially arising from the waters, that a whirlpool sometimes materializes in the middle of the lake, and that even a creature akin to a werewolf has been seen running by the shore. They say the lake is a portal to another world. The Oogles of Tallulah Gorge. Here in Georgia, the one in the US, we have a gorge up in the mountains called Tallulah Gorge. It's a beautiful place ripe with history and culture, with stories dating back to long before good old Christopher Columbus. The Cherokee people primarily lived in the North Georgia Appalachians, so this legend originates from them. Apparently, Oogles are miniature people. They are not dwarfs, they possess the same dimensions as a regular person, albeit on a smaller scale. The natives hardly went into the gorge because A, it's sheer granite on all sides with a raging river running through it, and B, they would have rocks lobbed at them from up on the cliffs. I've heard of Sasquatches doing things like that as well, but the natives believed it was these Oogles. They supposedly had settlements of sorts built out in the forests around the gorge, and my dad thinks he found one. When he was a young lad, around 13, he was staying with his grandma in a town up near the gorge. He knew the area like the back of his hand, he still does now. He caught wind that something had been found out in the woods. He didn't get much more context than that, but it being a small town in the 70s meant he didn't have much better to do than to go check it out. He hiked for around 15 minutes out into the woods and eventually got to a clearing. There was a little town set up, there was a small farm, some buildings, tools, chairs, the usual sort of thing. It looked like a homemade camp of sorts, but all of the things there were exactly half-sized. Axes, chairs, and even doorways were all half-sized. He left after exploring the grounds for a while, never to be found again. There is a town a few miles north of me where they have a strange being called Conch. Conch hangs about near a derelict house and a disused railway that runs past it. Someone reportedly saw him as a child playing in the area with friends in the 1970s. Conch is very tall, taller than a normal human, dressed all in black with a black hat. He is reported to have a see-through head. When the boy told his father said it was known when he was a child, including the local police, so that must have been mid-20th century, long before the internet. People locally know and talk about it, but no one knows why it's called Conch. People have reported experiencing feelings of fear and being watched while walking in the area. There doesn't seem to be anything about it online apart from a local Facebook group. Allegan County Road Haunting. I wanted to share a story about a time some friends and I decided to go tracking on closed roads near the Old Witches of New Salem Monument in Allegan County, Michigan. Let me start with the local urban legends surrounding this road. The sad story of this road starts with a man and his livestock. Michael O'Kurtz was a fifth-generation farmer whose family tended to an open-range sow farm that spanned between Allegan, Fenville, and New Salem between 1850 and the 1940s. In 1941, Mike was drafted into the United States Army. He served for a total of 3 years overseas. After his service, he returned home and soon took over his family business due to the poor health of his parents. After about a year of taking over the duties, he and his father attempted to clear trees for an access road. While trying to clear stumps from the freshly cut land, his father had flipped the tractor, causing fatal wounds. His father passed away minutes after the accident due to blood loss. Michael was at the scene and was unable to save his father. Fast forward a few months, while coping with the loss of his father, the livestock developed a respiratory illness, which eventually spread to his wife. After several grueling months, his wife eventually succumbed to her illness. After the eventual loss of his farm, Mike had started to lose it. Mike began to show an extreme interest in the occult to potentially bring back his family's wealth and his beloved wife. It wasn't long before this interest peaked, and he finally decided to make his sacrifices. One night Mike went out into the barn and picked up a splitting maul and proceeded into his cottage. Here, I am not going to go into detail, just know that by the end of the night, his entire family was butchered, including his brother, who had lived with them for a month at this point. After ending his family, Mike had suddenly realized what he had done and promptly hung himself in his barn. Since then there have been a lot of unexplained experiences along these seasonal roads, especially in the areas that are thought to have been Mike's property. So anyways, back to me. My friends and I decided to go on a 2 tracking down these closed roads in search of ghosts. Stupid, I know, but we were all dumb and oblivious. Well, we definitely were wrong. After reaching the last half of the road, we all thought we were in the clear. We had been drinking, which wasn't smart, but we just wanted to have a good time. That was until we met the last stretch before the pavement. There we saw several apparitions lining the road as we drove through. They were hard to spot at first, but as your windows neared, you could make out the faces of the dead. We drove as fast as we could, but I still get the sense they are with me. It scared the ever-living duck out of me, and I refused to go back down that road. There is a graveyard where I live. It is known mostly as 1,000 Steps because of a very old and battered set of stairs leading up to the oldest top portion of the graveyard. Most of the legends surrounding it center around these steps, such as cackling, disembodied voices, and even apparitions said to appear to bar entrance to the witching hour. I used to spend a lot of time here. I have seen and heard things that I definitely cannot explain, and one Halloween I did an EVP recording. When I played it back, it was one of the craziest things I have ever heard. I ended up showing multiple people the recording in which there were multiple voices speaking to me by name and also messing with our old dog. Sadly, I lost the recording years ago. But the people that I showed it to years ago still ask me about it on occasion. The place has some very heavy energy and history to it, and I no longer frequent it as I used to. I also knew people that worked there doing landscaping and such. Apparently there was a strange death that happened there a few years back. A worker somehow ended up flipping over a riding lawn mower onto himself by simply driving over a small curb when no one was around, tragically killing himself in the process. There is also a lot of graves that had to be moved due to erosion of the hill it is located on. Occasionally, caskets just pop out of the side of the hill and need to be relocated. It really is a beautiful place. But most locals tend to steer clear of it due to its legendary haunted status. I grew up in Minneapolis and loved fishing. I spent a lot of time in the woods. As soon as I got a license, I drove to as many of the 14,000 lakes as I could. I saw wolves, bears, cougars, moose, deer, and even a wolverine one time. At the age of 22, my friend and I made the decision to go camping. We had a tent and a brand new Old Town canoe. We set out for a fun-filled day of fishing. I was excited to get back to camp to fry up our catch of walleye, brown and black bass, and a rainbow trout, the only one to this day. It was then that I found out the old man of the hatchet was a true story. I had served at 2 camps in the town of Mounds, where the old man of the hatchet remained elusive. I was going to scare my friend. We started gathering firewood. I never thought Bigfoot would be in Minnesota, but I knew him from Finding Bigfoot, in its first or second season. Bobo was a source of laughter for us both. We were about 100 yards from each other, and I felt the presence of something. It was dusk, and deer typically move based on the game trail and the clearance. We weren't anywhere near bear country. My friend started to run towards me and asked what's bigger than a bear. All I could think of was a moose, which was not a possibility. I wasn't worried, we both had our concealed carry weapons, but he was spooked. Together, we trekked to the well. On our way back, we encountered what appeared to be a gigantic, black, muscular Doberman. It was following us, keeping a distance of 200 yards. I figured it was feral, and because of this thing's total lack of fear, I deduced it may have rabies. Its size freaked me out, so I turned around to scare it away. It rose up to its feet, and its eyes caught the sun during the golden hour. He asked me, "What is that?" I asked him if he was a chamber. He asked why. It disappeared into the thick foliage of sumac. We could hear it but couldn't see it. We broke down camp and were back home in under 1.5 hours. We were in the Taylor's Falls area. We immediately searched the internet, and we agreed it was no Bigfoot, Mothman, Lizard Man, or Skunk Ape. We found the Dog Man, and I believe it. One of my local base tournament friends, who was a scout leader for 25 years and is also from Wisconsin, told me that the area we encountered is becoming a hot spot. The girl with the glass eyes. This urban legend concerns the area of Marusi and is well known to the locals. It is claimed that in the cemetery of Marusi, there is the ghost of a girl with blonde hair and a white dress who seems to have been lost. As soon as you get close to her and you look at her face, you realize that her eyes look like glass. I will tell you what I know. This particular ghost seems to frequently appear outside the cemetery, but there are also testimonies of the girl appearing in the wider area of Marusi. There is an old rumor that whoever sees it with glass eyes has a pure soul, while anyone who sees it with blood-dripping eyes has an unclean soul. Are you scared yet? Most of the witnesses of this ghost are taxi drivers passing through outside the cemetery. They are talking about a little girl who is looking in another direction, but as soon as the vehicle approaches her close enough, she turns to them with her innocent eyes and throws them a look that freezes their blood. There is also the testimony of a taxi driver who often spends the night out of the cemetery and once saw the girl running through the closed gate and disappearing into thin air. This legend has prompted the interest of many researchers of the paranormal who sought to find out whether there is a small girl in the burial place that corresponds to the description of the famous ghost. It seems that in the old days, there really was such a tomb. It belonged to a young girl who was killed when a car hit her and left her at the spot of the accident. Since that day, she haunts that place, and this is how the urban legend of the little girl with the glass eyes, who might be actually real, was born. Here is a fun one from Phoenix. I love spooky stories. It is about an area just east of Phoenix called the Superstition Mountains. In the early 1800s, the area was in the middle of Apache land. The Apache didn't live or hunt near this area because they believed it was home to dangerous spirits. In the course of events, the Apache discovered copper nearby and took control of that area. If you know anything about the Apache, this was a bloody process. Despite the famous ferocity and war skill of the Apache, the land was open for mining. Like most newly mineable land at the time, prospectors rushed in and laid claims in the valley below the area playfully named the Superstition Mountains. A bit late to the game, Jacob Waltz, a Dutch immigrant, couldn't find a spot to start mining. One day, despite warnings, he wandered into the mountains and hit a huge vein of copper. Every day, he would sneak into the mountains and return with bags of copper. He quickly became the richest man in the area. People would follow him to the mine every day, but he was always able to lose them. The mountains are steep and rocky, so not surprising. Many of those who trailed him vanished from sight. One day, while trying to evade someone following him, Jacob slipped and fell to his death. The location of his mine died with him. To this day, no one knows the location of the mine or if it is even real. Hundreds of people hike into the mountains, sure they will find millions. To this day, it has never been found. It has been dubbed the Lost Dutchman's Mine. Some think that the Apache spirits use the mine as a trap for greedy prospectors to punish those who stole their land. Unwise people die all the time on Phoenix trails. Yes, you will die if you try to hike with one bottle of water in August. It happens every summer. The mystery surrounding the Superstition Mountains lies in the fact that the bodies remain undiscovered. This area is in town and has cell reception, so tourists stay on the main trail and are easily found by park rangers, but locals who go looking for the lost treasure simply disappear. Some think there was never a mine at all. They say Jacob made a deal with the spirits. They rewarded him with wealth for a blood sacrifice of the prospectors who stole their land. I thought this was a fun local story when I moved here, but every few months, there are local news reports on missing experienced hikers last seen in the area, and it makes you wonder. Urban legend, the Devil's Toy Box. In rural northern Louisiana, an urban tale about a place called the Devil's Toy Box sprouted up a couple of years ago. Legend has it that the attraction started at a run-of-the-mill haunted house called Farmer Grave's Haunted Orchard. Apparently, Farmer Grave wanted to kick his attraction up a notch, and he decided to build a very unique attraction. A shack covered in mirrors, every wall, floor, and ceiling, all facing inward towards each other. Almost immediately, all hell started breaking loose. Reports of individuals visiting, losing their minds, disappearing forever, and even committing suicide started cropping up. Mirrors have long been considered gateways into other dimensions, particularly the afterlife. A structure like the Devil's Toolbox is said to harness paranormal energy and focus it into a contained area, where space and time can. In a particularly haunting story, one visitor named John Tyler recounted his experience losing touch with reality after visiting the box. He originally paid a visit in order to search for another friend who had been missing since he came to the attraction. As soon as he came near the box, he got sucked into a completely paranormal experience. Eventually, he was able to distance himself from the box and ran his truck into the shack to destroy it so it could stop harming people. But rumor has it that copycat boxes have popped up in the rural areas of Louisiana, especially during Halloween time. In the 1910s, or 1914, I think, a woman from my hometown moved home from the city to take care of her mother. A man, who was a friend of hers, followed her. It's not clear if they were already romantically involved, but he had the intention to propose. He packed up all of his possessions and money and showed up on the doorstep of her family's home. They welcomed him in and gave him a place to stay for the night. That night, he proposed and was rejected. He was enraged and ended her. Then, he fled into the night with nothing but his night clothes and his razor. The police tore apart the countryside looking for him. The village was on edge. At one point, the police chased a local teenager for hours because he matched the description. The kid had snuck out of the house in his nightshirt to steal a watermelon and believed that was why the police were pursuing him. This went on for several weeks, expanding into the rest of the county and beyond. A couple of weeks later, a local farmer noticed his horse was missing. He was checking a neighbor's fence line on the edge of a swampy hollow, thinking his horse had escaped to visit hers, when he found the decapitated corpse of the killer. He ended his life with the same razor on the night of the murder. He had been lying dead no more than a few hundred yards from the scene of the crime for 2 weeks. We still call that sunken, swampy area Dead Man's Hollow. I'm in Minnesota, so the most common one I've heard about is the Wendigo. Heck, it's so well known in Minnesota that we have a lake called Wendigo Lake that is reported to be the domain of a Wendigo. I've had 2 personal encounters with a Wendigo, or what I believe is / was a Wendigo, once when I was a child and again when I was a young adult. Heck, Wendigo is by far my favorite cryptid / urban legend creature. My encounters with him have kind of turned me into a weirdo, as I am collecting plushies, figures, posters, shirts, art, etc. of the Wendigo. Another one, I don't know if it's even an urban legend or folklore creature, maybe it's just a personal entity. But I've called her the Pale Woman or Lady Moon, whom I've had several encounters with throughout my life. A benevolent entity / creature, as every encounter I had with this thing, it always came to the rescue, usually when lost in the woods or in a scary situation in the woods. Think of the color of the moon / rays of moonlight now condense it into a humanoid shape, with long, ground-length hair, a nude feminine body, and the eyes and body glowing with what is a silver light / moonlight. That's essentially what the Pale Woman or Lady Moon appears as. Every time I've seen her, it's like she also radiated a sort of soft hum, kind of like a planetary hum that you'd hear from NASA videos or audio that makes your whole body feel like it's vibrating, but it makes you feel very serene and calm. I've grown up in northern MN / country areas of the state most of my life and have experienced a lot of creepy, unexplained, downright horrifying things and have plenty of stories to share. In my hometown, what we had to worry about were the Min Min lights. I have an encounter I'll also include at the end, but I'll explain a bit first. They are named after the Min Min Hotel and appear as fuzzy disc-shaped lights or luminous orbs that sit just above the horizon. I mistook them for headlights in my encounter. They can be very erratic in nature, zigzagging around. The ones I come across were stationary. Whilst it might not bother a white person as much, in indigenous culture, if you let the lights catch up to you, you will vanish. I am indigenous myself, and the hair-raising, eerie feeling is similar to what I experience if I am on former indigenous slaughter or massacre grounds. I was out driving with a friend one night, and as I said, I did mistake them for headlights. I got out of the car with my phone flashlight and walked around the area for a bit before realizing we were certainly the only car out there. Once I had made that realization, I immediately hauled ass back into the car and started yelling for my friend to drive back into town. I informed her once we were back on the road that those were indeed Min Min lights, like she was beginning to think as well. While there are scientific phenomena explaining why it occurs, the feeling of being in their presence makes me reluctant to agree. I'm usually quite a logical person, but my gut can't comfortably say, yes, science. In this instance, I've attached an illustrated image for reference as well. A lot of the search results show light phenomena that don't really resemble the lights. Not to mention this has been something my family has experienced for generations. The haunted grave, a local legend realized. At first I was skeptical, but I've come to know without a doubt that my partner is gifted with necromancy, or the ability to communicate with the dead. He says that he inherited this gift from his mother, who was quite versed in her craft. She was a witch, and a very good, kind, and holistic one at that. Sadly, he lost his mother when he was 17, and she was only in her early 40s. Such a young life cut short, but she passed on something special. In my small, mostly rural hometown, which is a 3-hour drive from the larger city where we live, is a cemetery that contains the grave of a little girl who tragically passed away at only 2 years old in 1886. I'll omit her name out of respect. Stories say that she and her mother had made a batch of apple butter together. The little girl got up in the night and went into the kitchen to sneak some remnants of the sweet, spiced delicacy from inside the pot. Unknown to the family, the pot was made of lead and had been corroding. Sadly, the little girl was poisoned by the lead and did not live beyond those tender, innocent 2 years. According to local legend, the little girl's grave is said to be haunted. The gravestone itself is a life-size statue of her, which her parents had commissioned. It was rendered from an actual portrait of her taken shortly before she died. The statue of the girl is on top of a pedestal made of the same type of stone, so the gravestone is about 7 feet tall in total. In the statue rendering, the girl's hands are folded in her lap. Somehow, the statue always holds flowers inside the clasped hands, though no one knows who leaves them, because no one is ever seen placing them or removing the old bouquet. The flowers are just always there. One local legend states that if someone snatches the flower bouquet from the clasped hands of the statue at midnight, they can hear the little girl crying. Though I have always taken an interest in ghosts and the supernatural, I never attempted this because, for one, I was too scared, but mostly, the mere thought of doing it made me feel sad. My partner and I took a trip to my hometown to visit my family. This was his first time ever visiting my neck of the woods, so it was totally unfamiliar to him. Naturally, after hearing the local legend of the little girl who haunted her own grave, my partner wanted to visit the cemetery to see if he could get any readings from her, so we made the short drive there. It's only a few miles from my parents' place. As we approached the cemetery, he said he thought he could faintly hear a little girl's voice, but all he could make out was, "My feet hurt. My feet hurt." It didn't make any sense. This little girl was only 2 years old, why would she have sore feet? Was this even the entity we intended to reach, or was some other spirit trying to connect? The voice grew slightly louder to him once we entered the cemetery and even more so as we got closer to the site. Though still very faint, he could now definitely hear "feet hurt" as clear as day. When we finally reached her gravesite, we were shocked to discover that her statue had been vandalized. The feet had been knocked off. This occurrence really opened my eyes as to how real my partner's gift really is. There have been other instances over time that have given me even more solid confirmation, but I'll never forget the chill I got from this one. And he misses his mother every day. I wish I could have met her and that she had been a part of my life, but from what I've heard, experienced, and witnessed over the last 5.5 years, a part of her most definitely lives on within the person I love. I have a feeling that she is indeed a part of my life, just not in the way most people experience here in the physical world. The White Lady of Stevenston, North Ayrshire, Scotland. Growing up in Stevenston, I was told a fair number of spooky tales of old. One such tale revolves around a white lady who roams the countryside northeast of the town. The legend goes that the farm she lived in was burned down by the townspeople after she was accused of witchcraft / there was a pretty big land disagreement with the family and the townspeople. There are multiple stories and versions, not sure what the best one is, but I suppose that's not the point. In the fire, the lady was unfortunately killed, and her spirit is said to roam the country roads near the farm, seeking vengeance on the town. There has been a multitude of sightings of her. And I believe I have encountered her, and it was terrifying. I can't find anything on the internet surrounding the topic despite hours of research, and I find that odd considering the local popularity and frequency of encounters. If anyone knows anything about her / her story, or even something vaguely familiar, I would love to know, as I am interested and want to know more and bring light to this very real entity. Bailey's Ghost Light. James Britt Bailey was an original Texas settler who got here from North Carolina before Stephen F. Austin came. His property is now known as Bailey's Prairie. He was said to be a real troublemaker, constantly getting into disputes and brawls. When he died of cholera in 1832, he had demanded in his will to be buried standing straight up, facing west, with his jug of whiskey at his feet and his rifle at his side. Legend has it that the slaves that dug his grave stole his jug of whiskey, or in other versions, his wife took it away. Either way, he was deprived of his cherished beverage. Now, on cold dark nights, a light can sometimes be seen out in the fields of Bailey's Prairie, said to be old Britt looking for his stolen jug of whiskey. The light has been known to chase people in cars and will disappear as suddenly as it appeared. There's a really good book called Ghosts Along the Brazos that was written by a local historian full of these small-town Texas folklore and stories. I'm from Tennessee, and the main one that seems to get mentioned is the Bell Witch. But I would like to give special recognition to the Pigman / Pigface. Ask someone from the Memphis area, and they probably have some version of the tale. According to legend, a power plant explosion severely disfigured him, resulting in a pig snout-like nose and pointed ears. Being the 1940s, people weren't accepting and ostracized him to the surrounding forest, where he lived under a small wooden bridge. Supposedly, if you drive through the forest at night and come to the bridge, his spirit may appear. As for haunts, I'd like to share a personal story. Singleton Community Center in the Memphis suburb of Bartlett was once a fully functional school. The cafeteria had caught on fire, also very true, and claimed the life of a little girl named Mary. What else would she be called? Her spirit continues to haunt the building. There is said to be a few other spirits also located in the building. I went to summer camp at Singleton every summer for several years of my childhood. One day I was helping out one of the counselors and was going downstairs to the basement level. It was finished out. It didn't look like what you would picture when you hear the word basement. The entire building featured plain white drywall and the same wood floors. When I made it to the landing where the stairs split off, there was a man standing there. He was older, bald except for gray hair around the sides of his head. He wore a red and black plaid shirt and blue jeans held up with a brown leather belt. His face was expressionless, and he just stared back at me. I stepped back up one of the steps and looked away. When I looked back, he was gone. There was no way out of the basement without going back up the same stairs I was standing on. I was probably 10 or 11 then. I'm almost 35 now, and I still remember it like it happened an hour ago. There is a road in Yorktown, Virginia, called Crawford Road. It is a super narrow country road in a wooded area with an old overpass bridge. The bridge is covered in graffiti and paint. There are two separate stories I grew up hearing about the bridge/area. The first states that a heartbroken bride, after finding that her fiancé was cheating on her, hung herself from the bridge. The legend is that your car will stall under the bridge, and the ghost of the bride will appear, swinging from her handmade gallows from the bridge in front of you. The second story is the one that more people I knew believed. The legend has it that there was a lot of satanic activity in the woods around the bridge and that a satanic cult had abducted and sacrificed some children in the woods surrounding the bridge. Supposedly, animal sacrifice remnants and odd satanic altars were found in the area. This is somewhat believable, as it was in the height of the satanic panic that this story was most popular. Local kids playing tricks or trying their hand at their own ghost-raising rituals probably did leave satanic-looking altars in the area. A self-fulfilling prophecy, I suppose. Lol. Personally, I had one experience on that road. In the late 90s, there was a severe ice storm right around Christmas in the area. I was trying to visit my parents the morning after the ice storm hit as they didn't have heat at their house and needed kerosene and supplies and didn't drive/live pretty far down in a rural area across the river. I was taking Crawford Road to the main one, and there were trees down everywhere. The road was getting harder and harder to drive down. I was zigzagging through down pine trees. When I got to the point of the bridge, it got so bad that I was literally stuck. I couldn't pull forward or backwards. I had trapped myself in. After about a 75-point turn attempt, my car shut off. I'm stuck right in front of the bridge, my breath cold and cloudy in my face, and my stupid car would not turn over, nothing. The noises coming from the woods were terrifying and loud, piercing cracks and breaking branches, the sound of entire trees breaking in two under the weight of layers of ice. I had scared myself silly, convinced some beast with horns and a human torso was about to break through the trees and kill me. As suddenly as my car died, it came back to life, and I resumed my 177-point turn in order to turn the car around and zigzag my way back through where I came to find an alternate route to the main road. My car was an old Nissan/Datsun, the year it said both models on the car, and likely died because it was a giant pile of crap and not due to some witches/warlock spell to bind me to the spot to kill me. I finally made it off Crawford Road about an hour and a half later, and I did find an alternate route to the main road. That drive usually took me an hour. That day it took me over 4.5 hours to make my way to my parents. The majority of that time was scaring myself silly on Crawford Road, so young and dumb. 2 urban legends occurred in Beijing. The first story. If you ask me to name one of the most famous urban legends in China, I would like to first introduce this story because almost everyone in China who was born after the 1980s has heard it. I have read many different versions on the internet, and I would like to select one that seems more reliable. In 1995, one night, a bus was running in the suburb of Beijing, and the number of this bus was 375. Around the gate of a high school, a young man was waiting for this bus because only this bus could take him home. When he found this bus, he started to wave his hands instantly. After boarding this bus, the young man sat behind an old lady and found there were 6 people on the bus, including himself, the driver, and the conductor. Quickly, the young man attempted to have a break because he was exhausted already. A few minutes later, the bus stopped again, and 2 men got up. The young man glanced at the 2 men and found both of them were poker-faced. The 2 men did not talk, they just sat down and kept silent. However, at this point, the old lady in front of the young man stood up suddenly and grabbed the young man tightly. "Nasty guy, how dare you try to steal my wallet?" This young man was confused but responded, "I was sleeping just now, and I never touched your wallet. Why do you wrong me?" The old lady did not buy this but asked the driver to stop the bus immediately because there was a police station not far away from there. It seems that the driver was not interested in what happened but stopped the bus to let the old lady and the young man leave this bus. After stepping out of this bus, this young man asked innocently, "Dear lady, I never touched your pocket. Why did you wrong me? I am just a student." However, the response of this lady was so surprising. "Handsome boy, I have saved your life just now." The young man did not understand, so the old lady continued to explain what happened and why she asked the driver to stop the bus. "Handsome boy, have you noticed the two men who boarded the bus at last?" The young man nodded. The old lady then continued, "When the two went through me, I found something strange. Neither of them has feet, do you understand? In other words, instead of stepping on the bus, the two were floating just now. Therefore, I am afraid they were not human beings, you know what I mean." The young man was scared and was determined to report this to the police. Because there was a police station around there, the young man told the police what the old lady told him. But, you can imagine, the police could not believe the young man's words. However, at this time, the radio in the police station reported the news that a 375 bus went down a cliff not far away from there a few minutes ago, and there were 4 bodies on the bus, including the driver and the conductor. The second story. If you know something about China, I bet you must know a place named Beibao Mountain. This mountain is famous because the graveyard of top Chinese politicians is located in this place. And this story is about Beibao Mountain Station. One day, a man worked so late and then came off work around 11:30 p.m. while the subway had stopped at this moment. This man's home was so remote that he wanted to have a try to get on the tube because calling a taxi was so expensive. To his surprise, there was a train that would drive in the direction of his house, and the man got on happily. After sitting down, this man felt something slightly strange. Generally, now it was around 12 a.m. while this train was full of people. Furthermore, these people seemed very tired, and their clothes were worn out. Even so, this man was exhausted, so he did not think more. Because there would be an audio notification at every station, he then closed his eyes and took a nap. A few minutes later, he heard an audio notification that this train had arrived at Beibao Mountain Station, and he heard that many people got off. This man was so astonished why so many people got off here because this was not a significant station. But this man still closed his eyes, and the train started to run then. However, after a few minutes, he heard an audio notification that reported this train had arrived at Beibao Mountain Station. This man was shocked now because he remembered that he had heard the same message just now. In addition, he found nobody on this train now. He could not understand why he heard the report twice and why so many people disappeared soon. Lechusa Lady Witch Owl. What can or should I do? I don't know if this is the place for this, but I just need some info. I live in South Texas. I have been researching the Lechusa tonight. I was driving back to town, and a huge white owl flew in front of my truck. I would say it was a coincidence, but this is my 3rd time in 3 weeks. I have experienced this phenomenon twice, once upon returning from an out-of-town trip and once upon leaving work at midnight. I've been searching for sites on common birds in this region, and the owls in this part of Texas aren't as bright white and large as the ones I've almost hit with my windshield. Despite my initial disbelief in these Mexican urban legends, my experience in Panama has convinced me that anything is possible. Any information would help. A couple of local legends from my home country are about owls and mermaids. I don't have a story about owls, but apparently they steal souls of people close to death, and my mom is ducking terrified of them. I can't wear clothes or jewelry with owls on them around, or she will lose it. The mermaids have a pretty funny/creepy story. A lot of people are fishermen where I'm from because we're close to the coast. There was a man who would go fishing at night and would always throw his net out next to a cave where there were always an abundance of fish. One night he threw his net out and had a really difficult time pulling it up. By the 3rd throw, he couldn't pull it back up. After half an hour of trying, he decided to dive into the water and see what had caught his net. He entered the cave where there was an air pocket and saw a mermaid sitting on his net brushing her long jet black hair. Her skin was unnaturally pale and smooth looking, almost silver. She looked at the fisherman and told him to stop throwing his net out here or next time he wouldn't be allowed back up to the surface. She said this in our tribal tongue. He nodded in shock and swam back up to the surface, and no one fishes by the caves where I'm from anymore. My parents told me this story when I was a kid, and I thought it was hilarious. Side note, no one from my country swims in the ocean at night because mermaids steal souls during the night when they're allowed to come to the surface. The Ghost Bride of Cumberland Falls. Cumberland Falls State Park, located near Corbin, Kentucky, is a staggeringly beautiful spot nestled in the mountains. The gorgeous waterfalls and walking trails have been attracting visitors for over a century, many coming to see the famous moonbows visible over the falls on nights of the full moon. Whether you're planning to stay at the exquisite DuPont Lodge or rent one of the many cabins in the area, Cumberland Falls and Cumberland Lake can be the perfect spot for a small vacation or even a quiet honeymoon. But one honeymoon at Cumberland Falls in the 1950s ended in tragedy, a tragedy that still haunts the park to this day. The ghost bride of Cumberland Falls has been appearing in the park since the 1950s. The legend says that a young couple who had been married that very afternoon came to spend their honeymoon in one of the cabins near the falls. In the early evening, the drained but excited couple went for a walk, still wearing the clothes they had been wearing at the ceremony. The man took his camera along with him, prepared for the natural beauty of the falls and the glowing beauty of his new bride. The young woman decided she wanted a picture of herself in her wedding dress with the falls in the background. Climbing up a nearby hill in the cool evening light, the woman playfully danced near the edge of the cliff, filled with joy at beginning her new life. But that life came to a sudden, unexpected end. Moving towards the edge of the cliff to pose, the young bride lost her footing and slipped off the cliff edge, hitting her head on a rock and drowning in the swiftly moving waters beneath the falls. The unfortunate young girl still seems to be waiting for the excitement of her wedding night. Ever since her death, people have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman in a white wedding dress near the falls. The most common sightings of the ghost bride happen at the top of the cliff near where he fell. A road now goes along that cliff, with a sharp curve right near the fatal overlook. Many park visitors have reported seeing the figure of a woman in a wedding dress run in front of their car as they come around this curve. If anyone stops, the bride inevitably disappears without a trace. The second, and more spectacular, manifestation of the ghost bride of Cumberland Falls happens on the night of the moonbows. A moonbows is a phenomenon produced by moonlight refracting off of water in the air, in the same way that sunlight produces a rainbow. Cumberland Falls is the only place in North America where a moonbows can predictably be seen. Tourists commonly gather on nights of the full moon to see this beautiful effect of the soft light. But sometimes, people gathered to see the moonbows will see more than they were expecting. It's said that some nights, when the moonbows is at its peak, at the base of the cliff where the young woman fell, a ghostly figure dressed in a white wedding gown can be seen rising up out of the waters. The famous story of the ghost bride of Cumberland Falls attracts many visitors and curiosity seekers to the park. The story has left its impression on the park, so much that the cliff where the bride fell to her death is now known as Lover's Leap. The Woman on the Stone. It was in the summer of 1986, when I was 5. We lived at that time near the village of Swords in North County Dublin, Ireland, at the edge of a housing estate called River Valley. Our house was the last house of a cul-de-sac that was set into a slight hillside so that from the upper windows, we had a wide view of the land around. At that time the village and estate were still surrounded by fields, though it has since all been developed. The forest road that led up to the village was lined with great trees, beech, poplar, and pine. They looked like towers from my bedroom window, and a sheep field lay across the road from the side of the house. I have pleasant childhood memories of bright sunshine and warm breezes looking down on the lambs and ewes in that field from my side garden. My mother, with ghoulish humor, named one of the herd mint sauce. Visible also from my window, through the trees and undergrowth along the forest road, was an old disused blacksmith's forge. I don't doubt that this too has long since disappeared. Perhaps every childhood has its own haunted place. It was the local rumor that this old forge was badly haunted. A girl from my road called Janet used to offer up a dubious tale that some school friends, on a dare one evening, were driven shrieking from the place having heard a deep growl while one of them was witnessing the phantom of a woman, or rather an invisible form in an old-fashioned print frock, hovering in the loft of an adjacent barn. So much for the local legend. I never went near the forge, and what I saw, I don't think has much to do with it. Then again, what do I really know? What I saw from the window of the spare room, just beside my own, at the front of the house. My grandmother used to sleep here when she was over from her own house in Cabra, in the city. It was the end of summer, and my family had just returned from a holiday on the Isle of Man. It was a Thursday night, and on a childish flight of fancy, I crept from bed into the spare room. I looked out on the darkened neighborhood. Shadows danced in the lighted porches of the houses, and colored flashes came from the direction of Dublin Airport, across the fields. And then I looked down and saw it on the rock. There was a neighborhood marking stone at the entrance to the estate, just at the junction to the forest road, with the usual welcome to inscription. It lay visible just below that spare room window. Sitting there was the diminutive figure of an old woman in ancient dress. She wore a plaid cloak with an immense collar of shaggy fur, like the hair of a yak. Despite her apparent great age, her hair hung long and greasy black down from under her ragged cap. One deathly white hand was clasped over a large brooch on her cloak. The figure seemed to glow in its own light against the darkness around. I saw no one else about. Her face was abominable, she was shockingly pale. She had a heavy brow and terrible, raging eyes. They weren't the eyes of a human. More like a wild beast. Most disturbing, however, was my realization that those eyes had been fixed in a stare up at me from before I had even raised my head over the windowsill. Whatever she was, she had been aware of me before I was of her. It was a nightmarish sight, a vision of wickedness. But I was not sleeping. I remember the malevolence of the expression on that awful face. It induced a sickening feeling, and I felt like vomiting, but I was unable to move. Then the form of the little woman appeared to be growing steadily larger until she swelled well beyond the stature of a normal human being. She also appeared to rise in the air above her seat. Then a trickle of crimson passed down over my eyes, and the spell was broken. I collapsed down from the sill and hurried back to my own room. Later that night I dared to glance out my window, but of course there was nothing to see. I never saw anything of the weird woman again, and I have been greatly glad of it. We moved house the year after, and that was that, but I've never talked about or inquired further concerning this, all through these long years. Lincoln Gap. Not a strange creature, but a local legend. I grew up in Lincoln, Vermont. My dad was not quite an off-the-grid type of guy but liked to live in the woods far away from people. From what I remember, my parents owned about 200 acres of land on Lincoln Gap Road. My dad was a local who met my mom at UVM and convinced her after they married to move back to Lincoln. My friends and I would spend all our free time hiking the gap, making forts, playing war in the woods, and just aimlessly wandering around exploring. One day when I was around 12 or 13, my friends and I found a hollow east of the long trail by where it crosses the Gap Road. That's all I'm going to say about the location. That was creepy AF. You felt like someone was always watching you, and even though it was summer, I remember feeling a slight chill when we stopped as a group to chat and drink some water. We all had the same feeling of being watched, but I was the only one who got the chills. As we were exploring the area, my buddy Sam screamed for us to come over to him slightly down the hollow. What he found still perplexes me to this day. There was a slab, 1 by 2 feet, of rock, shale, I think, that was vertically stuck in the ground in a small clearing, 10 by 10 feet at max, mostly rectangular shape, of heavy, dense trees. It was completely out of place. There were no carvings or markings on the rock. Also surprisingly for how damp the rock was, no mold grew on it. This was in the mid-90s, so no one had a film camera with them or a cell phone to document the weird find. It looked like a rudimentary burial site. My buddy Kyle had a buck knife on him, so we notched trees in the general area, hoping to one day return and truly explore the area. We commonly did this and routinely would explore, mark a tree, and pick back up exploring a day, week, or month later. We notched trees all the way back to the long trail, where we originally departed from. A week later we followed our exit trail markings back to refine the area and take a photo. Sam convinced his mom to get him a disposable camera for the occasion. After following our markings, they seemed to stop perplexing the group. We had been hiking for around half hour, but we all remember hiking about an hour and a half out. Where the markers ended was not the site of the clearing with the stone but by Lincoln Brook, which none of us remember seeing or hearing the brook. No matter what we did, we couldn't find that hollow or the shale rock again. It is the only find we had, we were never able to find it again. After multiple failed attempts at finding the hollow, I asked my dad about the gap and if anything weird ever happens there. He told me a local legend that the Lincoln Gap is haunted by Abenaki spirits from long ago. Locals call them the protectors of the gap. People who are hiking in the woods report feeling watched when no one is there and occasionally smell a campfire when none can be found. I now live in the Northeast Kingdom, but every time I talk to my buddy Kyle or Sam, the mystery of the gap always comes up. I live in the Bridgewater Triangle, so I've heard all this stuff from my parents and grandparents. Along with the typical Irish folklore, there's the mystery cat, which is a large unidentified feline creature that has been consistently sighted since the 50s. I actually saw it once, but I'm pretty sure it was just a transient cougar, especially since the next week a lady hit one in northeast Connecticut. Thunderbirds, black dogs, Bigfoot, and the occasional giant snake have all supposedly been repeatedly sighted in the area, but a few of my favorites. Pukwudgies, a local Native American myth about troll/elf-like little people. They've been described as anywhere from simply mischievous to malevolent. They tend to only be sighted in the more rural parts around Freetown and along and in the Hockomock Swamp. New England Vampire Scare, started in Smithfield, Rhode Island, not part of the Triangle but only like 20 miles away, about a woman who died from tuberculosis. Within a few weeks of her death, People started reportedly being attacked by her in the night, and when ones would die, they would be fairly desanguinated. This panic then spread throughout New England, including the Triangle, and for a few years it became normal to pierce the hearts of the dead with a wooden stake, which at the time wasn't a part of vampire lore to kill them but was to keep them pegged inside their caskets. The tale has been used somewhat frequently as folklore to not vandalize cemeteries/graveyards because you don't want to wake up a vampire by accident. King Philip's Last Stand. During the waning days of King Philip's War, many of the Wampanoag tribes under the leadership of King Philip retreated to the heart of the Hockomock Swamp to try and regroup, but a lack of supplies, illness brought on by the stagnant waters, and the occasional settler raid finished them off. Because of this and the combined native lore of the swamp, Hockomock means land of the spirits in their language. It's believed to be extremely haunted, GPSs frequently fail to work, compasses go nuts, though that probably has to do with the large iron deposits in the area, and people report seeing spirits, hearing voices and even will-o'-the-wisps trying to lead them further into the dense swamp vegetation and sinkholes/quicksands of the swamp. Satanic cults, not actually paranormal, but because of the strong believed connection of the swamps to the other world, many a satanic cult has used the swamp and Freetown State Forest as ritual grounds for animal sacrifices and human sacrifices, though there is only one confirmed cult that performed up to 3 human sacrifices. It's good shit, man. I love urban legends. I have one that I actually experienced when I was 11. I grew up in a wealthy suburb of Buffalo, New York. Our little town was old and felt stuck in the past. It was a family-oriented place with lots of deep woods. There's a cemetery in the woods nestled to the side of a loop of houses. It's still being cared for, but I don't think anyone has been buried there in decades. It's a lovely little area where the local kids love to run wild. We were playing hide and seek when I noticed an odd tree. It was warped in a way that looked something like a face. When I walked close, I could see the warping look like a face and the tummy of a pregnant woman. It looked serene but gave me the creeps. I called my friend over, and she laughed. "You found the flamingo lady." "Flamingo? She lived around here a long time ago. She comes here to visit her baby." My friend was a bit of a jerk, but I could tell she was being genuine. "Sometimes you can see her at night. She has a really funny walk, kinda like a flamingo. Want to see the baby?" Looking back, it was definitely one of those neighborhood legends, but I had the chills. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I agreed. She took me over to a little grave with a lamb on it. The age was just under 3. That week I was staying at the house across the street, so we decided to try to get a glimpse of the supposed flamingo lady. Every night around 11 we would slip out and take the old road past the cemetery. It was a warm summer night, but there were no fireflies. We were about 30 feet from the baby's grave when my friend yanked my arm and pointed. Making its way down the road was a figure glowing with pale light. Its long hair was tangled, and it wore a simple long dress. As it lurched steadily forward, a new wave of horror hit me. Its legs looked bent backward, causing it to stagger as it walked. I grabbed my friend's hand, and we booked it back home. I haven't been home in years, but when I last checked, the neighborhood kids were still talking about a weird woman in the graveyard. The Kentucky Mothman. In 1966 and 1967, the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was visited multiple times by a mysterious winged creature. The Mothman, as it came to be called, was seen by over 100 witnesses over the course of the next year. The Mothman was described as a humanoid creature with large, glowing red eyes and a 10-foot wingspan. The sighting stopped suddenly after the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967. John Keel conjectured in his 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies that the creature's appearance coincided with the bridge's collapse. Keel argued that throughout human history, people have seen Mothman-like creatures before certain tragedies. The book, which was adapted into a 2002 movie starring Richard Gere, posed the idea that seeing a Mothman was a foreshadowing of a coming disaster. Judging solely by Richard Gere's career since the 2002 movie, this idea may very well be correct. But as Keel suggested, the appearance of the Mothman doesn't seem to be an isolated incident. The Mothman, or Mothmen, first appeared in Kentucky prior to the renowned Point Pleasant incident and has continued to make appearances ever since. The earliest recorded sighting of a Mothman comes from November of 1868 in Mount Sterling, where over the course of several weeks, over 24 residents reported seeing a winged man flying in circles above local landmarks, including what's known as the Wright Green Adena Indian Mound and the historic Johnson House. Despite the absence of any major disasters in the area following this sighting, the residents interpreted it as a very ominous omen, leading to widespread speculation about the presence of a demon and the impending end of the world. Throughout 1938 and 1939, There were multiple sightings of Mothman at either end of the state. The sightings began in Ashland, Kentucky, in March of 1938. Interestingly, Ashland is only about 60 miles from Point Pleasant, where the most famous sightings happened. Reports of sightings started in Elizabethtown in April of that same year. The sightings continued in both locations throughout the next 2 years, often within a day or so of one another, suggesting either that the thing can fly incredibly fast or that there were multiple Mothmen at work. Nearly every report commented on the large, red eyes of the creature. 1939, of course, saw the beginning of World War II in Europe, which is undoubtedly one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, if not all of human history. If the creature was warning of the growing storm in Europe, why it felt that Kentucky needed to be told first remains a mystery. The latest reported sighting comes from Pikeville, where a bird-like creature with glowing red eyes was seen several times by multiple witnesses in August of 2008. A man named Harley Foster is reported to have said he spotted the creature near his barn, and the Mothman acted aggressively and even seemed to chase him briefly. It's interesting that the Mothmen seem to appear in Kentucky with a roughly 70-year schedule. It's possible that these mysterious entities follow a supernatural calendar and appear during disasters by coincidence. Bad things are, after all, happening all the time. If this is the case, those of you reading this who plan to be around in about 2080 should keep a close watch on the skies. What's fascinating about Mothman reports is their psychological impact. Almost universally, those who have encountered the entities speak of them inspiring a sense of deep, almost primal, dread. This, and their perhaps tenuous link to disasters, have led some to speculate that the creatures are not actually physical beings but instead are some kind of manifestation of a collective unconscious. The idea behind the Mothman being a psychic projection is that when a lot of people go through a traumatic event, it can be so shocking to their minds that the power of their collective psyches can bend space and time to make one of these creatures show up before the event. We still don't know exactly how this occurs. But even in the realm of mysterious and possibly supernatural creatures unknown to science, there is something unusual about the Mothmen. Almost always, reports of Bigfoot or lake monster sightings describe someone disturbing the creature in its natural habitat. These animals all generally seem to stay as far away from people as possible. The Mothman appears to desire attention. The creatures always appear in populated areas. They appear to actively seek attention, but they do so according to their own terms. They appear to specifically target individuals for intimate interactions. And they seem always to be the ones in control of the situation. Hawaii Ghost, Honolulu City. Old lady with a black cloak. In 2021, I was visiting family in Oahu. It was my first time there, and I just had to visit every place I could. Honestly, everything about Hawaii felt so happy and comforting. I slept outside every night in my parents' backyard and woke up with the sun. I slept outside every night for a week. It was absolutely magical. About a week in, my family and I decided to head to Honolulu, eat some food, shop, and walk around. We walked around until about sunset, and the last stop was these little alleyway shops. I cannot explain where it is, besides, it's in Honolulu City, it was the only time I went there. But basically it was just at least 100 salespeople with their carts of goods filling this maze of alleyways. But anyway, when I was done walking through, my parents and I walked over to this opening outside of the alleys and decided to wait for remaining family to finish shopping. My parents and I leaned up against a building for a moment to relax. I vape, so I took that moment to take a few pulls. Now, I remember I was crouching and leaning up against the building. My mom was leaning next to me, and my father was standing, facing me. Literally, all within a foot of each other. But anyway, as I was in the middle of a pull, this old lady with a big black cloak? I remember her almost resembling the evil witch from Snow White with the apple, was in my face, crouched next to me, and just held her hand out. I immediately stood up, weirded out by the sudden invasion of personal space. She was so close that the first observation I made was seeing a long nose. And a bony, pale hand. But to me, the creepiest part was the cold, emotionless face she gave me as I stood up. She didn't move her hand or face or anything for that matter as I stood. Just her eyes, for just a half a moment before I looked at my dad. Honestly, that's the image that haunts and gives me chills to this day. So scary. He glanced at me and asked if I was good. Obviously, they could tell something spooked me. I was like, yeah, but I started to whisper, "What's up with this lady?"
But in a split second, I looked down at where I was crouched and no lady.
Literal WTF moment. I'm spinning in circles trying to point out the lady to my parents, but nowhere to be seen. This little opening was big enough with only 2 alleyway openings and really not that many people. There's no way we wouldn't see this lady walking out of there. When I tell you she was gone before I could finish a sentence. My dad was like, "I thought I saw you look at something before you stood up." Like what? She was literally body to body with me with her hand out. After that spook, I got back to my parents' house and tortured myself with Hawaiian myths, legends, and ghosts. Let's just say I never slept outside again. Russian legend. There had been legends of a flying man in the Soviet Union, but not quite like the one described above. Hunters around the Sikatay Mountains near Vladivostok claimed to have come across prints of a barefoot human that ended abruptly, as if he had taken off into the air. Such a creature was actually seen by writer V.K. Arsenyev in July 1908. I saw the mark on the path that was very similar to a man's footprint. Then something rushed about nearby, trampling among the bushes. Then I stooped, picked up a stone, and threw it at the unknown animal. Then something happened that was quite unexpected. I heard the beating of wings. Something large and dark emerged from the fog and flew over the river. Legend of Woolly Swamp, The Secrets in the Woods. You may know the story told in the Charlie Daniels song Legend of Woolly Swamp. Well, you may be surprised he's from this little town I call home. So you can imagine that these creepy woods around here influenced his music. One is the aforementioned song. He even mentions Carver's Creek in it if you listen. That's an old creek that used to be a popular fishing hole about 12 miles west of Elizabethtown. Woolly Swamp is where the creek feeds in. Now it's been said many moonshiners called the old swamp home. That's where they made their spirits, and some, like Lucius Clay, were said to have left their spirits right there. Most of those old moonshiners liked to bury their money in mason jars so the law wouldn't get their stash, and neither would some of the more desperate people looking to make a quick buck. If you listen to the song, it will tell you the rest. The truth is that old man still walks that swamp protecting his still and his money. The old man himself sat down one evening after we had been out hunting and told me the story of where that song came from. Charlie very much loved to hunt, and he came down every year to bag him a buck or two. This is what he told me. The song came from a story he was told as a child. When he got older, he thought it was told to keep the kids from venturing in the swamp and running up on a moonshiner or maybe a gator. So he got bold, and he and a few of his friends went out one night looking. There was an old shack back up in the woods where Lucius lived, and they knew where it was, so with some liquor and flashlights, they went to see if the old man would come around. "You have to go when the moon is full," he told me. Lucius walked when the full moon was out. That's when he liked to dig up his money. I held on to every word while Charlie spoke. He could tell a story and keep you glued better than any TV could. We went out there, sat around, even built a little fire, and broke out the bottle of Jack. Must have been out there for a while just having a good old time when we noticed the fire had turned blue and was getting pretty damn cold. Won't like the fire had gone out, there were flames 3 feet high off the thing, but they were blue flames like you'd see burning off a good jar of moonshine. Hell, I could run my hand through the flames, and they were cold to the touch. That's when we noticed we had one more feller sitting with us than what we came with. The old man was sitting right there and had a gaze locked on every one of us. He took that bottle of Jack and turned it up and said, "So you boys come for my money, or my shine?" Charlie said the woods got real dark, and you could hear screams coming from all around them. The old man said, "They came for my money and shine, but the gators got them now." Charlie said he let out a laugh that made your hair turn white, and that's all they needed to see. Charlie said they got out of there so fast he didn't even know if they left anyone till they got to the end of the road. He said he looked over, and Lucius was sitting beside him in the truck, still laughing. He said Lucius told him not to ever come back down there, or next time the gators would have him too, and then just vanished. They never went back to Woolly Swamp. In fact, to his last days, Charlie wouldn't hunt down around that swamp. Charlie told me Lucius was the damn devil, and I best not go around there if I didn't want to meet him or those gators. I took his warning to heart and never went in there. I can't say Charlie telling me that story didn't make me curious. Oh, I ventured down that way a few times. On a full moon night, if you go down there and park your car in the right spot, you can hear Lucius in the woods laughing and the screams off in the distance from those that never came back out. If you venture in there, you might run across an old shack and see where there was a campfire. When you do, I hope you go ahead and run out of there pretty quick. Lucius still has his money hidden out there, and he aims to keep it. Like I told you, those woods hide many dark secrets. Charlie didn't believe it, and he had to see it for himself. He said it best, there are just some things in this world you just can't explain. Colorado Urban Legends. The Gates of Hell. The Gates of Hell, located near Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado, are a place thrill seekers only dare visit in groups, with some even bringing holy water and Bibles. It is a place where legend speaks of satanic worship, murders, sacrifice, and a lady in white who roams the nearby road, forever searching for her way home. They come to see the burned ruins of a great mansion, the haunted trunk of a tree scarred from fire, and the terrifying dark, musty room hidden underground. Among the ruins, those courageous enough to travel through the gates of hell come upon the ruins of the old mansion. It is said that the man that built it lost his mind. One night, he set the entire mansion ablaze with his wife and children asleep inside before he disappeared, never to be held accountable. Muffled screams can be heard echoing against these now crumbling walls that bore witness to the unspeakable crime. Is the lady in white that walks the road the lost spirit of the woman that died at her husband's hands in this place? Is she still trying to escape the fire or looking for her murdered children? Though people stop to offer her help when they see her, she silently continues on her path, eyes forward, never turning. The Good Samaritan will proceed along Riverdale Road, only to glance in the rearview mirror and discover her disappearance. This horrible murder was one of many atrocities committed on the cursed land. There are tales of slaves being burned and hung from a tree at the back of the property near the banks of the South Platte River. Today, the burned tree still stands almost as if a memorial to those that are reported to have died there. Those that sit beneath the tree on a quiet night can hear it creaking in the wind. Is this the sound that would be made by the victim swinging at the end of the rope? Some nights moaning can be heard. Is this the sound of the spirits that cannot move on because of their tragic, sudden deaths? Maybe it's just the wind. That's what people tell themselves as fear starts to build inside their chests. The sights and sounds of the tree and the ruins are chilling, but what people really come to see is what was once an underground chicken coop where mysterious markings cover the walls. It is said that it was here that the mansion's builder, prior to slaughtering his family, would conjure spirits and demons. Hidden from sight beneath the ground, he wrote symbols of black magic on the walls in the blood of his victims, trying to access power from an unseen world. As one walks down the steps into the darkness, the dampness fills the lungs, making it hard to breathe. The flashlights can only illuminate small portions of the dark, tomb-like room. There's a sense that something waits in every corner only to scurry away just before the light sweeps across it. The shuffling of their own feet through the debris on the ground keeps visitors guessing, did I just hear a footstep or was that me? They stop and listen, heart racing in anticipation of what they might hear. For those that are brave enough to sit quietly in the dark, they will hear the heavy breathing of an unseen occupant in the room, hovering just over their shoulder, taunting with an unseen presence. It's believed that the markings on the walls entrap something. Some believe it to be a demon. Is that what you can hear when you breathe? Hopefully, those who visit this unholy place do not unintentionally allow it to escape. Follow them home. The Yellow House, Urban Legend. The Yellow House is a scary true ghost story about a haunted house named La Casa Matucita in Lima, Peru. This is the most famous urban legend in Peru. There is a strange, bright yellow house in Lima, Peru, that is said to be cursed. The name of the house is La Casa Matucita, and according to legend, a group of people met a grisly end on the second floor of the old building. Many years ago, an old man lived in the yellow house. He had a wife or children and lived with his servants, a butler and a cook. The man occupied the second floor of the yellow house, and his servants lived on the ground floor. The man was ill-tempered and treated his servants very badly, constantly mistreating and insulting them. The servants were filled with hatred for the man and vowed to someday get their revenge. They came up with a plan to publicly embarrass their employer. One day, the old man was holding a dinner party. When his guests arrived and were seated in the dining room, the servants decided to take their revenge. They had obtained illegal hallucinogenic drugs, LSD, and put them in the food they were serving to the man and his guests. Then the servants walked out, quietly locking the dining room door behind them. They retired to the kitchen to await the results of their plan. After about 15 minutes, they heard angry voices and the sound of plates smashing. They chuckled to themselves. This was followed by violent yells and blood-curdling screams. The servants began to get worried. After the noises had died down, the butler and the cook opened the door of the dining room and were horrified by the gruesome scene they discovered inside. The walls and ceiling were splattered with blood. On the floor lay mangled bodies and body parts, eyes, hands, internal organs, severed heads. The faces of the guests were twisted masks of hate and terror. Each and every guest at the dinner party, including the old man, had met a brutal and terrifying end. Driven insane by the hallucinogenic drugs, the guests had murdered each other in the most appalling ways imaginable. The sight of so much savagery caused the servants to lose their minds. Horrified by the massacre they had caused and fearing they would be executed by the law, the servants took their own lives, hanging themselves from the ceiling of the dining room. Ever since then, the Yellow House in Peru had a reputation for being haunted. Most people were afraid to go near the place. It is said that the house began to fall to ruin until it was purchased years later by a property developer. Later, a Japanese family moved into the house. They were completely unaware of the history of the old building and of its fearsome reputation. The night they moved in, the husband took a knife and murdered his entire family before killing himself. After that, the house lay vacant for many years until a local priest was asked to perform an exorcism there. The owners wanted the house to be cleansed so that it could be sold. The priest entered the first floor with no problem. It was when he set foot on the second floor that he had a panic attack that resulted in his death. Another of the best-known cases is that of Humberto Vera Vilches. In the 1960s, a television host made a bet live on air, saying that he would be able to spend 7 nights alone inside the house. He managed to stay one night, and the next morning, he was found lying outside on the pavement. He had lost his mind and had to be confined to a mental asylum. He was never heard from again. It is said that from time to time, ghostly screams and yells can be heard coming from La Casa Matusita. Some people have even seen ghostly figures lurking in the second-floor windows. Today, the first floor of the Yellow House is rented out to a business. The second floor is kept unoccupied and securely locked. According to legend, if a group of people goes to stay the night on the second floor of the Yellow House, they will go insane during the night and slaughter each other, reenacting the terrible events that happened there years before. Well, not exactly a myth because it was reported in a national newspaper and thousands of people experienced it, but it did start as an urban legend. In 2019, one of my colleagues who lives in a neighboring town, like 50 kilometers away from me, told us about how one night the local police station went to their municipal hall, gathered people from all over the town, including him, and warned them to beware of a mysterious knocking on their doorhouse that might occur around 2 to 3 a.m. Basically told them if they heard that, please don't go out and just ignore it. It turned out a tiny village just outside the town was being harassed with the mysterious knocking. Every house in the tiny village collectively made a police report, and after every house was knocked, it seems the mysterious knocking has spread outside the village, making its way to the town area. The police really can't do anything about it because there were some people who went outside when they heard the knock, but there was no one or nothing outside. No evidence and no eyewitness. Some residents even installed a CCTV, but nothing appeared on it even though they heard the knock. Luckily no one was hurt, but there was this case where a guy was ready with a machete, went outside after getting the knock on the door, and angrily shouted for the prankster to come out, only for him to get knocked down from behind by nobody. Nobody was behind him. Eventually, it was said that after the whole town was finished, the mysterious knocking went down south. Even surpassing a few states. My country is not that big. This was when the thing got so big that it made it to the local news. Somebody made a video about it. They waited by the door because at this time, it was expected to. And yep, no one was outside. The mysterious knocking went on through 2020, when COVID-19 happened, and MCO was imposed. We had a curfew, so nobody was supposed to hang out at 2 to 3 a.m. at that time. But here's the thing, the knocking never reached my place. Why? Because there's a highway from the neighboring hometown that goes straight to the next state. My place is a border town, I guess. The next knocking actually went from the neighboring hometown to the border town in the next state, totally skipping my town. So whoever entity, alien, human, or other being who does that probably took the highway for his or her or its next destination. John Swift's silver mine. One of the most famous legends in Kentucky is the story of a lost fortune buried somewhere in the hills near the Red River Gorge. In the 18th century, an Englishman named John Swift is supposed to have traveled across the Appalachian frontier and discovered a silver mine. The location of Swift's mine has been lost, and despite treasure hunters scouring the hills of Kentucky for over 200 years, it is yet to be rediscovered. Some people say that Swift himself still walks the hills of Kentucky, searching for his lost fortune. In the 1760s, an Englishman named Jonathan Swift claimed to have traveled through Kentucky into the Ohio River Valley, trading with members of the Shawnee Nation and searching for evidence of mineral wealth. Swift claimed that on one of these trips, while pursuing a wounded bear into a cave, he stumbled upon a rich vein of silver running through it. Swift concealed the mine, then returned a few months later with the equipment to set up a mining and refining operation. Over the next 9 years, Swift returned time and time again to the mine. During that time, he is said to have left large amounts of silver buried around the area. There are several different accounts of Swift's final years at the mine. Some say that he faced an insurrection from his work crew and had to flee the mine. Others say that Swift himself ended his own crew in cold blood while they were sleeping on his last trip out to Kentucky. Whatever happened, the stories agree that Swift went to great lengths to conceal the entrance to the mine when he left for what would be the final time. Swift went blind soon after his last visit to the mine and spent his final years living with a Mrs. Renfro in Bean Station, Tennessee. Unable to return to the mine himself, upon his death Swift left Mrs. Renfro his journal, which contained a map of where to find the mine and its hidden wealth. Despite the details supplied in the journal, for over 200 years treasure hunters have been unable to locate the lost mine. Countless expeditions have been made throughout eastern Kentucky in search of the lost treasure. Perhaps the area with the best claim to be holding the lost mine is in Wolfe County, in the area around what's known as Swift's Creek. Not only does the area seem to match the descriptions in Swift's journal, but the presence of the lost mine may be attested to by some spectral evidence as well. For nearly 2 centuries, hunters and hikers in the backwoods of Wolfe County have reported seeing a strange, ghostly figure wandering the hills. The figure appears to be a man dressed in buckskins and a tricorn hat, appearing every bit the 18th century woodsman and explorer. But what's most strange about the ghost is that it appears to be blind. Those that have seen it say that it moves at a stumbling pace, with its hands extended in front of it, as if it has to feel its way through the wilderness. There are those that say that this is the spirit of John Swift himself, returned from the grave in an attempt to find his lost mine. There are others who think that this may be Swift's eternal punishment for murdering his crew, that he is condemned to be forever searching for and forever unable to locate the treasure that drove him to murder. If you're inclined to go out to Wolfe County to see if you can find the ghost, or if you want to try your luck at finding the lost mine, a good time to go would be during the annual Wolfe County Silver Mine Festival, held every year in celebration of the legend. I have lived all my life right outside Baltimore City and have had a penchant for urban legends and the paranormal for years now. The 3 most intriguing urban legends that come to my mind are Black Aggie, the Crybaby Bridge, and Loch Raven Reservoir. Black Aggie. The story of Black Aggie originated a long time ago. Some say she was a nurse, others a slave, and yet others a shop owner who often attended to or cared after children while their parents were at work. Whatever her origin, children started to disappear when Aggie was around. As such, suspicions were raised, tensions flared, and Aggie was accused of foul play and quickly put to death. Shortly thereafter, it was found that Aggie had been entirely innocent and was wrongly accused and killed. As reparation, a statue was erected in the Druid Hill Cemetery just over the city line into Pikesville. The statue of Black Aggie quickly became known for its unexplainable goings-on. Grass refused to grow around the statue, no matter how well tended. On clear nights, it was said that you could see silvery childlike specters floating around the statue's base and calling out for their parents. The most notable trait of Black Aggie was her eyes. At night, and sometimes even during the day, when those wandering the huge, serene graveyard would look over towards her sitting facade, they would start at the sight of burning red eyes glowing, staring directly back at them from Black Aggie. As the statue was sitting, you could lay across her lap. It became a game more or less to spend the night on Aggie's lap and was even used as a hazing ritual for a local frat. One year, a pledge carried out his task and slept on her lap, only to be found the next morning frozen to the stone, dead, with his eyes open looking directly up into the face of Black Aggie. As her story spread, vandals caught on, and the statue was removed and placed in a cemetery. Grass grows around the pedestal now, and specters are no longer seen. Aggie is now somewhere in D.C., publicly erected, and presumably at peace. Crybaby Bridge, Maryland has its fair share of racist pricks, and there was a large KKK community in Prince George County, PGC, back in the day. The legend holds that a 1-lane, covered bridge built sometime in the 1950s called the historic Governor's Bridge was a popular dumping site for kidnapped babies to be thrown over the side and into the rushing water below by angry Klans members. This horrific, racially charged pattern of murder spurred uneasy and restless spirits to linger for decades to come. If you go to the Governor's Bridge in PGC at night, on a moonless night, and turn off your car's lights and engine while in the center of the bridge, be prepared. You'll hear frogs, maybe a locust or cicada. The water is under the bridge. A creak and a crack. And then, out of the darkness comes a piercing crying, a chorus of ghostly infants screaming for their mothers and questioning why as they are tossed below. The crying is said to echo only on the bridge and gets louder the closer you get to the end, then abruptly stops. And so the legend of Crybaby Bridge remains. This story is a popular one, and it is said to have originated in PGC, Maryland, but has had renditions told in multiple states. Loch Raven Reservoir. Despite being less sinister, Loch Raven Reserve remains equally intriguing. The loch exists just outside of Baltimore in the county and has been a spot I've cherished all my life for its serenity and calm waters, nice fishing holes, and long trails. However, if you go up the path off of the main road and down past Providence Road, you can find your way to an old bootlegger's house that sits in ruin. It's old, Gray stone foundation pokes out from the overgrown grasses on the side of a bike trail, and the easiest way to spot it is from the huge granite slab that once marked the entrance to the famous Swill Den. Come during the day, and you get some nice history, a good view, and some spider webs in the face. Come here at night, and it's a different story. You hear voices, distant, as if they were over the water, but then you turn and they sound close, as if right behind you. Turn again and they are further off, beyond the path behind the trees. Whispers, laughter, the click-clack of a horse-drawn carriage barreling down the road laden with moonshine. The noises that emit from these ruins are fascinating, and I've heard them. Mainly, it's the laughter and the clank of glasses and the slamming of doors that got me. Not to mention, being in the woods at night is no cakewalk. That's what I've got for Baltimore. There is also the Bunny Man, DC, and the Goat Man, and I have plenty of UFO stories about Loch Raven if anybody is interested. The legend of the Jorogmo. In the ancient forests of Japan, there lived a fearsome yokai known as the Jorogmo. This creature was a half-woman, half-spider that could transform into a beautiful woman to lure unsuspecting men to their doom. The Jorogmo was notorious for her cunning and deadly allure, making her one of the most feared yokai in Japanese folklore. One evening, a young samurai named Hiroshi was walking through the streets of a small village. The sun had just set, casting long shadows across the path. As he made his way home, he was accosted by an alluringly gorgeous woman. Her beauty was mesmerizing, and her eyes sparkled with an otherworldly charm. She approached Hiroshi with a seductive smile, her voice as sweet as honey. Despite her enchanting appearance, Hiroshi sensed something was amiss. His training and instincts as a samurai made him wary of the woman's intentions. As she tried to seduce him, he noticed subtle signs that betrayed her true nature. Her movements were too fluid, her gaze too intense. Realizing she was not human but some kind of yokai, Hiroshi's hand instinctively went to his sword. With a swift motion, he drew his blade and plunged it towards the woman. She let out a shriek of pain, her disguise faltering as she quickly retreated into the shadows. Hiroshi followed the scarlet trail of spotted blood, determined to uncover the truth. The trail led him to an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of the village. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were covered in cobwebs. As Hiroshi stepped inside, he was met with a horrifying sight, dozens of bodies bound in spider silk, their lifeless eyes staring into the void. In the center of the room lay a giant Joro spider, its body grotesque and monstrous. The creature was dead, its injuries matching the wounds Hiroshi had inflicted on the woman. The samurai realized that the Jorogmo had been using her beauty to lure men to their deaths, feasting on their flesh and leaving their bodies to rot. Hiroshi's heart pounded as he took in the gruesome scene. He knew he had narrowly escaped a terrible fate, and his resolve to protect the village from such horrors grew stronger. He left the abandoned house, vowing to warn others of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The legend of the Jorogmo spread far and wide, a cautionary tale of the deadly allure of the yokai. It served as a reminder to always be vigilant and to trust one's instincts, for not everything that appears beautiful is benign. Whistling at 1:30 a.m. So I got home from my boyfriend's house around 1:30 a.m. on Friday. I park my car down the road from my house since we don't have space. As I get to my walkway to the front door of my house, I hear a short 1 to 2 whistle. Not like wolf whistling, but a very quick one like when you're trying to get someone's attention. I stop and look around, and I can't see anyone or hear anyone moving. I'm pretty familiar with my neighbors. We're in a small dead-end street, and in the 10 years we've lived here, they've never done this sort of thing, so I think I can rule them out. Anyway, as I go up to the top step of the landing, I hear the whistle again. I stop, look around, and again I see and hear nothing. I felt my heart start to race lol, and I turned my back to put my key in the door. And as I'm putting my key in the lock, I hear the FKN whistle again, but it sounded closer or like it came from a slightly different direction. Still from behind me, but closer to where I was. I have never opened my door so ducking fast. I peeked through the windows to the side and still couldn't see who it could have been. The next day, I tell my family and boyfriend over dinner about the whistling. And they all said, "Oh, it's that bird. That noisy bird." And yes, there is a noisy bird in our area that makes noise at day and night. However, it's not a whistle as such, it does more of a high-pitched tune that goes for like 2 to 3 seconds. It's a distinct noise, and it sounds nothing like a normal whistle. And of course I can distinguish the two because I've heard this bird all day every day for a few months now. Fast forward to this morning, my mum messages me and says my sister heard whistling last night. Before she could send her next message, I said, "If you're going to say it's a bird, it's not." She said my sister told her, it definitely came from a person, and it was like a song. But not that bird we were talking about. It was a person's. My sister said she heard it at 4 a.m. and thought someone was in the house. It was that clear, and she wanted to scream but was too scared. Maybe it's a new bird that's flown to our neighborhood. But in the years we've been here, no one in the family has mentioned any creepy things like whistling in the night. And for it to happen a couple of times within the space of 1 week? Man. Weird. If anyone has heard of similar stuff happening in the middle of a night like this, let me know. Update. I heard the whistling last night. However, it wasn't the same whistle I heard a week ago. I heard the sing-song whistle that my sister heard. It was loud and clear enough to wake me from my sleep around 3:30 a.m. I sat up and stopped to listen, and it was a tune. I tried to hear if it was a song, and then maybe I could recognize it. It was not anything I recognized. It was so creepy hearing it so clearly, I can't believe I woke up from it. It didn't sound like it was coming from inside but very close to my house outside on my side of the house. I told my mom, and now she's all freaked out because 2 of us have heard it. What if someone is lurking around the house? And all that. My dad, being a big, strong, macho man, nothing scares me, is telling us it's the neighbors or birds and to relax. Now can I be scared? Black Star Canyon, California. Back when the area was in Spanish hands, the rancheros used the land for horse ranching. There was a tribe of natives that lived in the canyon that was known as horse thieves and wound up stealing a bunch of horses. Well, a group of American trappers had recently arrived in the area and came to an agreement with the rancheros to get these horses back. Led by a member of the Irvine family, these guys were ruthless, ran up on the tribe, and massacred most, if not all, of them. Now the only reminder that there were ever people there are some holes in the rock throughout the valley. In recent history, it used to be the main highway to Corona. During that time, a Sunday school bus used to make the trip through the canyon often. Well, one day it took a turn too fast and flipped, sending it tumbling down the hill. It caught on fire, a whole bunch of kids and a teacher were killed. Today locals try to deny this had ever happened to dissuade trespassers, but the bus is still at the bottom of the ravine. My friends and I have seen it up close, and I'll tell you, honestly, that thing burned up a long time ago. The locals even insisted they remove the bus, but no, it's still there. One night my friends and I were all feeling pretty brave and wanted to go at night. We'd never been at night, all 7 of us picked up flashlights and headed out. I shit you not, we all got about 20 feet down the canyon, all stopped at the same time, and went back to the car without a word. We all got a horrible feeling at the same time that told us not to go down. The urban legends surrounding the place are kind of hokey. The legend says that a demon haunts the place and takes the form of an old man. I never took it seriously until I realized that every time I'd been there, the place was devoid of people, except for a single old man. It was different every time. One guy was walking alone on a hike, and one was biking. The last time was the strangest. I never returned after this. 2 of my buddies and I had just hiked miles in, trying to find the bus. We turned around a bend, and this old dude and a younger man were trying to salvage an old backhoe that had been bogged into mud years ago. The old guy was super aggressive and told us we were trespassing. We told him we weren't, it's a state park now, and ignored him. My buddy asked him why he was trying to salvage such an old rig. The old man said they had it running a week ago. Okay, bullshit. He told us he was a landowner, more bullshit because he looked homeless. And let us continue down the trail. Well, right before we hit the part of the trail where the bus is below, this guy comes storming up the trail, yelling at us not to trespass. We decided to leave at that point, it's miles from anything, and we didn't know if this guy was armed or what. It only occurred to me after that the younger guy was practically hiding from us and never said a word. Very odd encounter. Most of the other urban myths are that the KKK and gangs do initiations down there at night. The place has been kind of a dark spot in California. Now the place is still inhabited, but by creeps that own houses deep in the canyon to hide away from society. Homeless camps are growing too. My friends and I went in a few times, and I'll tell you, the place has an awful vibe to it. I've spent a whole lot of time camping and hiking throughout the California desert, and I've never come across a place that feels so off. The Harrodsburg Mystery Grave. In the first half of the 19th century, Harrodsburg was a prosperous town, made wealthy by trade and the easy access to the Kentucky River. It was also the crown jewel in Kentucky's antebellum social scene. The healing waters of Graham Springs and the Grand Hotel there drew the planter class year-round for music, dances, gossip, and all the other pleasures of old Kentucky's social life. But at one of these dances, a young woman danced herself to death, and her ghost still walks the town. The grounds of what was once Graham Springs Sanatorium are around Young Park on the south end of Harrodsburg. At the height of its popularity, wealthy patrons from all across the South flocked to the springs and the accompanying resort hotel. Throughout the summer, the hotel would hold grand balls, where bourbon flowed as freely as the gossip, and the dancing went on late into the night, accompanied by a band composed of enslaved African American musicians. It was on one such night in 1840 that a beautiful young woman walked into the ballroom on the arm of a handsome escort. The woman's gown was luxurious, excellently tailored with an eye towards even the smallest whim of the current fashions. Dark eyes shone out from pale skin and a crown of lovingly curled hair. The patrons at the springs were in awe as the lady and her gentleman companion glided with grace and precision across the dance floor. Nobody in the hotel knew this beautiful young couple. They hadn't been seen earlier in the day taking the waters or dining in the hotel. They seemed to have arrived only to dance. But late in the evening, the mysterious woman fell from the arms of her companion and collapsed on the dance floor. The music stopped, and everyone in the room rushed to the side of the young woman. Everyone, that is, except her companion, who disappeared out the door in the confusion. But nobody noticed he had disappeared at first because of the alarm that spread quickly through the room. The beautiful unknown dancer lay dead on the floor. A search began for the identity of the young woman. No trace of her companion could be found. None of the patrons in the hotel nor any of the townspeople recognized either one of them. The owner of the spring, Dr. Graham, was understandably alarmed that an unknown young woman had died on his dance floor, but he thought that surely such an obviously wealthy and well-dressed young woman would be missed by someone. He sent word out across the state, hoping to find someone to claim the body. But no one did. Eventually, Graham decided to bury her on the grounds of the hotel, in a simple grave with a marker that stands still today and reads, "Unknown. Hallowed and hushed be the place of the dead. Step softly." Bowhead, who was this mysterious young woman? One story that emerged a number of years after her death was that she was a Tazewell, Tennessee woman named Molly Black Sewell, the wife of a traveling actor named Joe Sewell. She had married him impulsively, attracted by his glamour, but soon found that she had married an abusive cat who beat her and routinely played around with other women. Molly fled for Harrodsburg and the glamorous life she had expected, finding a companion with similar interests on his way. This story comes from a man named Joe Rupp, who had been told by Joe Sewell when he was a boy that his wife had danced herself to death in Harrodsburg. Rupp told this story to a reporter years later, when Sewell was already dead, and so whether or not the mysterious young woman really was Molly Black Sewell has never been verified. But you might still have a chance to ask her who she is. Ever since that night in 1840, late on warm, clear summer nights, residents of Harrodsburg have reported seeing a pale, white figure dressed in the height of antebellum luxury walking the grounds near the mystery grave. Maybe some brave soul can hide himself by the grave on one such night, waiting for the ghostly figure to appear. Perhaps if he's gentlemanly enough, the ghost might even speak to him and reveal her secrets. Over the heath, there was an ancient crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water, but it did. The building was constructed from bricks, featured a black slate roof, and had iron doors. However, at the time of the incident, it had deteriorated to a mere shadow of its former glory. It lacked any doors, as generations of kids had smashed in the windows with rocks and stones. They told us my mother and her siblings played over the heath there as kids. Spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer, in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all berry picking to keep us quiet. Mama gladly agreed. The boys, who were 16, 17, and 18, were extremely responsible and mature. They regularly babysat us younger kids, so we all understood the rules of staying close to them and following their instructions. After half an hour, everyone had their fruit buckets and we were ready to go. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all really excited as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gron's blackberry pies were the best. Gron's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other and then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us and half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins H or B. They were masters and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap in the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wives' tale/urban legend that we all knew about the Waterhouse. The story goes. Once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang members was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the group being seriously wounded in the crossfire. The remaining gang members escaped with a few hundred and went to the Heath and hid in the Waterhouse, which was new at the time and perfect for murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang members, and months later, although it was never proven how, the bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the Waterhouse 6 months later. A few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the Waterhouse. Mysterious hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging river weeds was always smelt around the area of the Waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the Heath not too far from the Waterhouse. Despite the lack of evidence linking the deaths to the Waterhouse, the locals soon began to shun the Waterhouse and its surrounding area due to its eerie history and dark reputation, leaving the Waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. We were aware of the Waterhouse's sordid past. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were through the fence gap farther from the Waterhouse, the younger cousins had enough courage to glance over at the shady building before being rounded up by the older boys. Put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field, where some other local kids we knew were already there. We spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy, sweet blackberries, as well as splashing in the river. Soon, the sun was setting, and it was time to head home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering and laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly, but being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and more subdued. When we reached the fence before the Waterhouse, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. B lifted my wheelchair over the fence after the youngest of the 3 older boys got me out of it. The other kids were already on the other side with H and B. A suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice. Something moved at the back of their groove. B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh, but A was straight-faced. A said, I'm going to have a look. Passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. Wait up, A, we've got tea. Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the 2 boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did, with B picking up my tiny wheelchair and folding it up while running, A grabbing the other 2 kids' hands and following B, and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. I kept saying, don't look back. Don't look back. I did but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence, which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, What did you see, eh? Yellow eyes, hairy face. All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be alright, but we all wanted to get as far away from the Waterhouse as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. He just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell, and as that was quite commonplace over the Heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face or find out what it actually was, but we kids didn't go near the Waterhouse for a long time after. Bobby Mackey's Haunted Honky Tonk. In Wilder, Kentucky, just south of the Ohio River and Cincinnati, stands a building with a reputation for blood-curdling apparitions, a diabolical history, and perhaps even an entrance to hell itself. The site of the building at 44 Licking Pike in Wilder, where Bobby Mackey's Music World now stands, was, according to tradition, originally used as a slaughterhouse in the mid-19th century. There is still a drain in the basement of the building that eventually feeds into the Licking River, where, when in use, The unwanted bits of the animals were washed away. According to tradition, the unscrupulous owner of the slaughterhouse could, for the right price, also arrange for anything, or anyone, else unwanted to disappear down the drain. After the slaughterhouse shut down, the building was abandoned and fell into disrepair for an extended period. It was during this time that the basement was supposedly used as a site for a satanic cult to practice its diabolical rites, allegedly sacrificing children in the basement. Whether this bit of the story of the building's past is accurate or not remains to be verified by historians, but who knows? As far as we're aware, the late 19th century may very well have been the heyday of devil worship in the greater Cincinnati area. We do know that the site first became a nightclub in the 1930s, when it was bought by a man named Buck Brady, who named his new establishment The Promise. The Promise was soon broken under the weight of the Chicago mob, who, with Prohibition just having ended, still had a hand in the liquor market across Ohio and through northern Kentucky along the river all the way down to Louisville. Although Brady was trying to run his place above board, the mob was anxious to replace the substantial amount of revenue that the re-legalization of alcohol meant losing. Unable to deal with the pressure, Brady committed suicide within the building. The mob ran the place as a Latin music club called the Latin Quarter until the 1950s. As with most finer mob operations, gambling and prostitution were both freely available on site. The mob was finally forced out, and the building went through a period of mixed use, opening again as a music club in the early 1970s as the Hard Rock Cafe, not the same as the one with the t-shirts. The period when it was the Hard Rock Cafe was another one of violence for the building. A riotous honky-tonk, the Hard Rock was well known for bar fights that escalated out of control. There were several fatal shootings on the premises throughout the 70s, and in 1978 the authorities finally shut it down. It was that year that country music recurring artist Bobby Mackey bought the club and turned it around. It was also around this time that the stories of strange apparitions and supernatural happenings began to circulate widely. There are multiple legends about Bobby Mackey's music world and the spirits that haunt it. One story is about a singer named Robert Randall, who worked at the club during its mob days in the 1930s. Randall carried on an affair with a woman, Joanna, whom Randall eventually impregnated. Unfortunately, Joanna's father happened to be the club manager. Sleeping with a mafioso's daughter isn't the best career move for any aspiring singer, and when Joanna's father found out, Randall soon disappeared. It was assumed permanently. A distraught Joanna took her own life, and her ghost is still reportedly seen floating around the club, usually accompanied by the distinctive smell of her rose perfume. Mackey himself has recorded a song about the incident. Another story ties the nightclub to a famous murder from 1896, the death of Pearl Bryan. On the morning of February 1, 1896, the body of a headless young woman was discovered on a farm near Newport, Kentucky. An autopsy revealed that her head had been removed neatly with surgical instruments and that she was several months pregnant at the time of her death. Police were able to identify the body through the fashionable shoes she wore, which were discovered to have been mail-ordered a few months prior by a 22-year-old woman named Pearl Bryan of Greencastle, Indiana. Bryan came from a socially prominent family in Greencastle. She was also the subject of a considerable amount of gossip, having often been seen in the company of two young men, her cousin William Wood and a newcomer to town, Scott Jackson. Sometime in late 1895, Bryan became pregnant by one of these men, and in January she told her family that she was traveling to Indianapolis to visit relatives but instead went to Cincinnati to obtain an illegal abortion. What happened when she arrived in Cincinnati is still not completely known. Jackson's association with Bryan was discovered by the police, and he was arrested outside a boarding house in Cincinnati where he was staying while studying to be a dentist. Under police questioning, Jackson admitted that he had arranged for Bryan to travel to Cincinnati for the abortion but named Wood as the father. When Wood was questioned by the police, he identified Jackson as the father. The father's identity was never firmly established. Police soon took Alonzo Walling, Jackson's roommate, into custody after Jackson told police that he had left Bryan in Walling's hand to facilitate the abortion. Walling said that he believed Jackson had committed the murder. Jackson said he thought it was Walling. Both claimed to have no direct knowledge of events. Prosecutors went to trial with a circumstantial case built from the testimony of witnesses to Jackson, Walling, and Bryan's movements through the days before the killing. The most damning testimony came from a cab driver named George Jackson, who testified he had been paid to drive the man and a moaning woman to Kentucky and seen them disappear into the woods near where the murder occurred. Despite maintaining their innocence to the end, both Walling and Jackson were convicted and sentenced to hang. Although both men seem to have been involved in some way with the events around Bryan's murder, the exact extent of their involvement remains unknown, as this complete account of the Pearl Bryan murder and trial reveals. There is an even stronger case to be made that there was no deliberate homicide and that Brian died of complications from an attempted abortion, and that it was the man who performed the procedure, a Dr. George Wagner of Bellevue, Kentucky, who removed Brian's head in an attempt to conceal the botched, then illegal procedure. In recent years, patrons at Bobby Mackey's have reported seeing the figure of a headless woman in late 19th century clothing wandering through the music world. The figure has been widely known as being the ghost of Pearl Bryan. There is a slight kink in this attribution. The site where Pearl Bryan's body was discovered lies about 4 miles away from Bobby Mackey's Music World, and recent versions of the story, which say the murder was committed at the building that was then still a slaughterhouse, seem to have no basis in historical evidence. Maybe the restless spirit of Pearl Bryan, who seemed to have enjoyed a good time when she was alive, was just drawn to the lights and music of the happening joint. Whoever she is, she seems to do no harm. The same can't be said for some of the other spectral inhabitants of Bobby Mackey's. In 1994, J.R. Costigan, a patron at Bobby Mackey's, claimed to have been physically assaulted in the men's room by a ghostly figure wearing a cowboy hat. Costigan claimed that while using the facilities, the spectral figure kicked and punched him. Costigan sued Mackey, claiming that Mackey was negligent in failing to rid his property of dangerous ghosts, and sought $1,000 in damages. Mackey's lawyers filed a motion calling for dismissal, noting the extreme difficulty in calling the ghost to testify for the defense. The judge apparently agreed, as the case was thrown out of court. In a bid to avoid further legal troubles, Mackey has since posted a sign by the club entrance stating that the premises are haunted and that management is not responsible for any spectral damage. But perhaps the most alarming feature of the haunted honky-tonk is the supposed portal to hell found in the basement. People entering the room that holds the old slaughterhouse drain routinely report an overwhelming feeling of sickening dread. The door to this room refuses to stay locked and will open and close seemingly by itself. Lights in the room come on and off of their own volition. Many people have reported being tugged, scratched, or pushed by unseen hands in this room. These hands also seem to be inclined towards violence, as multiple people have reported being pushed down the basement stairs by invisible forces. Some people have even reported seeing a hunched, swiftly moving, not quite human figure with glowing amber eyes moving in the dark shadows of Bobby Mackey's basement. Does the old slaughterhouse drain lead not, as previously assumed, into the Licking River, but down to hell itself? Is the shadowy figure seen in the basement, who can appear and disappear at will and who seems to resent the presence of people in the building, a demonic guardian at the gateway to hell? Are the ghostly figures seen around Bobby Mackey's drawn to the demonic portal? Are they lost souls who have escaped torment by coming through the gateway? Are they warnings sent forth from whatever lies at the other end of that old drain? Well, visit for yourself and find out. Bobby Mackey's Music World is welcoming to ghost hunters and even offers ghost tours. But despite its association with death, Bobby Mackey's Music World should also be credited with keeping the spirit of classic country music alive. So when you plan your visit, plan to stick around and catch some great musicians at work. As Mackey himself says, come for the ghosts, stay for the music.